The salt stings your eyes, mixing with the smoke from your burning home. The screams have faded, replaced by the rhythmic groan of wood and the slap of waves. You are bound, surrounded by a language you don't understand. On a ship sailing towards an unknown darkness, a ghost of a life left behind. Frankish chronicles from 858 AD simply state that a multitude of women were taken captive. A sterile, single line in a forgotten ledger. But what did that sterile phrase truly mean? What happened to this multitude? Mainstream history focuses on the plunder of gold and silver, but the true currency of the Viking Age was human life. How did this systematic capture of women fuel an entire empire? And what happens when a society not only condones such terror, but codifies it into law? Keep watching, and we will show you the passages in their own legal texts that sanctioned the unspeakable. The secret isn't just that the violence happened, it's that it was officially permitted. A horrifying privilege of power that has been deliberately ignored for centuries. For 1,000 years, that permission remained buried in obscure texts. The voices of its victims lost to time. They left no diaries, no letters, no testimony. But what if they left another kind of record? A witness that could not be silenced, burned, or forgotten? To find it, we don't go to a dusty archive. We go here, inside the sterile hum of a modern genetics lab. Scientists have mapped the very code of life, and hidden inside is a permanent scar, an echo of that long-ago trauma. This is the story written in blood and biology. When researchers sequenced the founding population of Iceland, a nation born in the heart of the Viking Age, they uncovered a ghost in the machine, a shocking mathematical anomaly. The paternal line, the fathers, traced back almost entirely to Norway and Scandinavia, nearly 80%, but the maternal line, the mothers, told a completely different story. Over 60% of them weren't Norse at all. They were from Ireland and Scotland. Think about that measurement. 80% of the fathers were Viking settlers. 60% of the mothers were not. This isn't a family tree. It's the forensic footprint of a conquest. A crime scene written in the double helix of an entire people. The question is, how did this happen on such a massive, nation-defining scale? And how was this grim reality erased by the heroic sagas of exploration we all know? To find the answer, we have to peel back the layers of the myth and confront the gilded cage of history they built. That gilded cage of history is a powerful construct, built over centuries from Norse sagas and romantic art. It's the story we are sold, the one we want to believe. It speaks of master shipwrights, their hands shaping magnificent dragon-prowed ships from raw timber. It tells of daring merchants navigating by sunstone and star, creating a global trade network that stretched from the icy shores of North America to the bustling markets of Constantinople. We see the gleam of their intricate knotwork on jewelry, the glint of massive silver hoards dug from English soil. We imagine them as poets, explorers, and pioneers. This is the official history, written largely by the Vikings and their descendants. A carefully curated legacy of strength and adventure. It's a magnificent story, polished, powerful, and compelling. And it's a half-truth so brilliant it blinds us to the horrifying reality it conceals. To understand the other half of the story, you have to stand on the shores of a place like Lindisfarne in the year 793. Imagine a quiet monastery, a center of learning and peace. The only sounds are the cries of gulls and the gentle chanting of monks. And then, a shadow appears on the horizon, a ship, low and fast, with a terrifying serpent's head. For the people on that shore, this was not the arrival of a trader. It was the apocalypse. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a harrowing year-by-year account of this period, doesn't speak of trade. For the year 867, the monks of England wrote only of chaos. The invaders slew, captured, and laid waste. This wasn't trade. This was terror. The official histories, written by the victors, omit the sounds and the smells of their conquests. But the records of their victims scream. They tell of a people who were both merchants and monsters, often on the same voyage. The same hands that carved the beautiful earnest style into a church door were the hands that swung the axe. The same ship that carried amber and furs on one leg of a journey carried human beings in chains on the next. This wasn't random brutality. It was a terrifyingly efficient business model, a model made possible by a single, revolutionary piece of technology, an engine of conquest that allowed them to strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. To understand the terror, you must first understand the machine that delivered it. To understand the terror, you must first understand the machine that delivered it. Look at it. Even now, 1,000 years later, its beauty is undeniable. The elegant, sweeping lines, the proud, carved head, the sheer perfection of its form. We are taught to see it as a marvel of naval architecture, a vessel of discovery, but that is a profound misunderstanding of its primary purpose. This was not a vessel of exploration. It was a weapon system, the most advanced of its age, and every single curve and plank was designed for psychological dominance and violent conquest. Their secret wasn't just courage, it was technology. The overlapping planks of its clinker-built hull gave it a unique combination of strength and flexibility, allowing it to twist and ride the brutal waves of the North Atlantic, where other ships would splinter and break. But its deadliest feature was its shallow draft. It could float in less than a meter of water. To a Frankish or English lord in a fortified castle, this was an unthinkable nightmare. It meant no coastline was safe, no river was too shallow. A fleet could appear from the fog, bypass coastal defenses entirely, and row dozens, even hundreds of miles inland to strike towns and monasteries that believed they were protected by geography. And then there was its symmetry. A prow at both ends meant it never had to turn around. It could hit a beach, unload a raiding party, and leave just as quickly, the crew simply reversing their positions to row away from danger. It was the ultimate instrument for a lightning raid. This wasn't a ship. It was a predator's skeleton, honed by generations of evolution into the perfect killing machine. A sleek, silent shark that could glide through the veins of a continent to strike at its heart. It was an engine built for one purpose: plunder. Silver, gold, weapons, and a commodity more valuable than all of them combined. That predator, the longship, was built to hunt. And its most valuable prey wasn't a thing at all. It was people. In the Norse world, they had a word for them: thralls. The meaning is simple and brutal. Slaves. Thralls were the lowest rung of society, the invisible engine that powered the Viking Age. They were not considered human beings with rights or a past. They were property, tools, livestock to be bought, sold, and used at the master's whim. This wasn't a dirty secret. It was a foundational pillar of their economy and way of life. And the sagas, their own heroic histories, speak of it with a chilling normality. To understand this, look no further than the 13th century Laxdæla saga. In it, a powerful Icelandic chieftain named Höskuld travels to a bustling slave market in the Baltic. He is shopping. Among the rows of human beings for sale, one catches his eye. A beautiful, but silent, woman. The slaver demands a high price, claiming she is a princess. Höskuld inspects her, treats the transaction like any other major purchase, and pays for her in silver. He buys her, forces her into his bed, and she bears him a son. The saga presents this not as a tragedy, but as a business transaction. It is simply an event in the life of a great man. But what the saga glosses over, we must not. Can you imagine the silence of that woman? A silence mistaken for stupidity, but born of unimaginable trauma? Her name, we later learn, was Melkorka. She was indeed an Irish princess. Her life, her family, her very identity stolen from her in a violent raid. She was trafficked across Europe and sold on a wooden platform like an animal. Her silence wasn't a defect. It was a shield, the only piece of herself she had left to control. Melkorka's story is horrifying because it's preserved, a single name in a sea of nameless victims. But she wasn't unique. She was part of a vast, relentless human harvest that took place for 3 centuries. For every captured princess recorded in a saga, thousands of ordinary women and children were swept into the darkness, their names and stories erased forever. To understand the sheer terror they faced, we must go to the moment their world ended, the moment the red tide of longships appeared on the horizon. That red tide of longships appeared on the horizon, and for countless coastal and riverside communities, it meant the world was about to end. Imagine a village in Francia, the year 858. The day begins like any other. The rhythm of life is set by the sun and the tides. The air smells of wood smoke, livestock, and the sea. And then a lookout shouts. A shape cuts through the morning mist, low and fast. Then another and another. Panic erupts. A frantic scramble for safety that is already too late. The longships don't land at a fortified harbor. They slide onto the undefended beach, their dragon prows seeming to taste the sand. Men leap into the shallows, a terrifying wave of iron, leather, and brute force. Picture this: the smell of salt and wet wool, mixed with the acrid smoke of your neighbor's roof catching fire. The sound of a splintering church door, a place you thought was a sanctuary, now an entrance to hell. A language you don't understand. Guttural shouts that are not words but weapons of fear. You are pulled from your hiding place, your arms bound. Around you is a vision of pure chaos, men cut down, the old and infirm discarded, the strong and the young assessed with cold, calculating eyes. This isn't a battle, it's a harvest. For the women in these coastal towns, the arrival of a longship wasn't an adventure. It was the end of their world. The official chronicles say they were captured, a sterile word for a terrifying reality. This isn't fiction. The Annals of Street, Bertine, a dry, dispassionate chronicle of the era, notes for this very year that Vikings on the River Seine took a multitude of women captive. A multitude. An entire generation of daughters, wives, and mothers, reduced to a line in a ledger, as they were forced onto the same ships that brought this destruction, leaving behind the smoking ruins of their lives. A new terror began. For the women on those ships, the violence of the raid was only the beginning. They were sailing away from everything they had ever known, into a world with a different set of rules, a world where their capture wasn't seen as a chaotic act of war, but as a legitimate acquisition. The real horror wasn't the lawlessness of the raid, it was the law that was waiting for them. The law that was waiting for them across the sea was not a law of justice, it was a law of ownership. A law of the wolf. We have this image of Vikings as lawless berserkers, driven by nothing but impulse and bloodlust. But that is another dangerous misconception. They had a deeply complex and structured legal society. They had courts, assemblies, and intricate oral and written laws governing everything from inheritance to insult. And it is within this very structure, this veneer of civilization, that we find the most profound and calculated cruelty. To see it, you must look inside documents like the Gragas, the law code of the Icelandic Commonwealth. It's a blueprint for their society, a window into their worldview. And when you read it, you first find things that seem familiar, even just. It specifies a penalty for raping a free woman, lesser outlawry, a 3-year exile, and the complete confiscation of your property. It was a recognized and serious crime against her and her family's honor. They understood the violation. They legislated against it. But this wasn't just the chaos of war. It was worse. It was policy. Hidden in their own law codes is the darkest secret of all. The Gragas laws specified a penalty for raping a free woman, but expert analysis of these texts reveals a horrifying omission. Those laws offered zero protection to a thrall. She was property. Her body was not her own. Any sexual act performed on her by her master was not a crime. The violence was legally sanctioned. A thrall could not be raped in the eyes of the law for the same reason a man could not be accused of raping his own livestock. The act was legally impossible because the victim was legally subhuman. This wasn't a secret act of shame. It was a documented privilege of the powerful, a privilege written in ink, a violence of the pen. But does this paper trail of cruelty lead anywhere? Can we find the physical evidence of this system? The silent testimony of the victims themselves, buried in the cold, northern soil, a privilege written in ink, a violence of the pen. But does this paper trail of cruelty lead anywhere? Can we find the physical evidence of this system, the silent testimony of the victims themselves, buried in the cold, northern soil? The answer is yes. The evidence is there, and it is unambiguous. For centuries, this was all buried. But now, the dead are beginning to speak. The breakthrough comes from a field of forensic science called strontium isotope analysis. It sounds complex, but the principle is beautifully simple. The geology of the Earth is different everywhere. The unique chemical signature of the rock and soil where you live gets into the water you drink and the food you eat. As a child, when your adult teeth are forming, that signature becomes permanently locked into the enamel. Your teeth become a tiny, indestructible passport that tells scientists exactly where you grew up. When archaeologists began applying this technique to Viking-era cemeteries, they expected to find communities of locals. Instead, they found a ghost population. Forensic analysis of Viking graves in Denmark and beyond is revealing a hidden pattern. The chemical signature embedded in the enamel of their teeth tells us where a person grew up, and grave after grave, the women are foreign. A high-status woman buried in a Danish fortress turns out to have grown up in Germany. Another, buried with rich goods in Norway, came from the British Isles. Displaced, brought to this land against their will, either as traded brides in political alliances, or, far more often, as the human spoils of war. Their bones are the receipts of a forgotten trade. Each tooth tells the story of a single stolen life. A silent scientific testimony that corroborates the terrified whispers of the ancient chronicles. This is the physical proof that the thrall system wasn't just a law on a page. It was a vast operational reality. But these individual graves are just the beginning. They are the captured pieces of a much larger, more disturbing puzzle. What happens when you put them all together? Is it possible to measure the full, shocking scale of this displacement, not in a single cemetery but across an entire nation? Is there a final witness that can reveal the true genetic verdict of this entire era? That final witness exists. It's the one we met at the very beginning. The one that contains the collective story of every victim, every survivor, and every perpetrator. The witness that cannot lie, be altered, or be silenced. It is the ghost in the machine. It is the DNA. Remember the numbers, the shocking mathematical anomaly that started our investigation. The founding population of Iceland. A paternal line that is nearly 80% Norse, and a maternal line that is over 60% Gaelic from the coasts of Ireland and Scotland. For decades, it was a sterile, scientific puzzle. Now, it is a verdict. Over the course of this investigation, we have followed the chain of evidence. We saw the engine of conquest, the longship, a weapon of terrifying efficiency built to strike deep into the heart of unsuspecting lands. We learned of the human commodity. The thralls, women like the Irish princess Melkorka, captured, trafficked, and sold like livestock. We felt the terror of the red tide, the raids that swept up that multitude of women recorded by panicked monks. We read the horrifying fine print in their own law codes, a system that deliberately and legally stripped these women of their humanity. And we found the physical receipts for this trade, the chemical testimony of the teeth, proving a population of displaced foreign women buried in Viking soil. And now, we can finally understand the ghost in the machine. That shocking imbalance. 80% Norse fathers, 60% Gaelic mothers. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a peaceful migration. It's the national scale result of 1,000 brutal voyages. Each raid that captured women, each slave market that sold them, each law that stripped them of their rights, it all leads here. In Parliament, this is not a theory. It is a conclusion demanded by the combined weight of history, archaeology, and forensic science. The genetic echo of the thrall is the founding signature of a nation. This is the confession that could never be erased. The case is closed, the verdict is in. But the story doesn't end here. Because to dismiss this as just the savage history of a single ancient people is to miss the point entirely. The terrifying truth is that this pattern of power is not unique to the Vikings. It's a dark thread woven into the very fabric of human history. That dark thread is woven into the very fabric of human history. And this is where the story becomes truly disturbing. It is easy to condemn the Vikings, to see them as monsters from a distant past, a savage anomaly in the story of civilization. But is this story truly about them? Or is it about a timeless and disturbing pattern of power, of conquest, of what the powerful have always believed they are entitled to take from the powerless? Look closer, and you see the same brutal mechanics at play, again and again, throughout the centuries. The pattern always has the same components. First, a technological or organizational advantage that enables the conquest. For the Vikings, it was the longship. For the Roman Empire, it was the disciplined legion and the paved road. For the conquistadors, it was the galleon, gunpowder, and steel. Next comes the psychological justification, dehumanization. The Vikings had their thralls. The Romans had their barbarians. Colonial empires had their savages. A language of otherness is created, a vocabulary that methodically strips one group of their humanity to turn them into a resource for another. And finally, the system is codified. The violence becomes official policy. The Norse laws that denied a thrall her own body are echoed in the slave codes of the Americas and the colonial decrees that stripped indigenous peoples of their land and rights. It is the cold, bureaucratic logic of oppression, turning chaos into an organized, profitable system. The genetic echo we found in Iceland is a stark, measurable example, but the process it reveals is universal. The names change, the ships change, but the pattern remains. And the most consistent part of that pattern is the silence that follows, the silence of the conquered. The triumphant histories are written, the heroic sagas are told, and the statues of the conquerors are raised, but the voices of the victims are erased. So where do their stories go? What happens to the truth when the only records left are the ones written by the powerful? What happens to the truth when the only records left are the ones written by the powerful? It goes underground. It hides. It waits. It embeds itself in the things that are left behind, the unintentional evidence the conquerors never thought to destroy because they never saw it as a record at all. We will never know the names of the vast majority of the women swept up in the red tide. We will never hear their individual stories, their hopes, their fears, their memories of the homes they lost. Their experiences were consumed by the great grinding machine of history, deemed unimportant by those who wrote the sagas and the chronicles. They exist now only as a collective silence, a vast, unwritten history of suffering. We remember the name Melkorka only because she was a princess, an anomaly whose story was tied to the great men who owned her. For every one of her, there were 1,000 ghosts who vanished without a trace, their silence mistaken for consent, their absence mistaken for insignificance. But that silence is not empty. The true, dark secrets of the Viking voyages will never be fully known. They weren't written in sagas or carved on runestones. They died in the silence of women like Melkorka. But their story isn't entirely lost. It is in the haunted measurements of our own DNA. It's in the foreign chemistry of the bones buried in northern soil. It is in the chilling omissions of their own law codes. The historical records are not hidden. They were never really lost. They've been here all along, waiting patiently in the blood and in the earth. We just had to learn how to read them. There are more hidden records waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to learn about the secrets we're exposing next.